all right. Welcome everyone to the activation session sponsored by Verus Global. I'm Craig Ross, your host, CEO of Verus Global. Super excited about our time together today. Thank you. We've got folks from around the world joining us. And of course, we know that most people actually listen to this in recording as a follow-up if they couldn't make it live. And so we're excited to have you with us either in person today, including you in our important discussion, or of course, later in the recording. This activation session is sponsored by Verus Global, where we absolutely believe that organizations that are not aligned not only do a disservice to, of course, their customers, but equally so a disservice to their employees, because we as human beings want to do what? We want to optimize, we want to actualize, we want to live and experience and deliver on our fulfillment, on our potential. And so we're dedicated at Verus Global to supporting leaders like our guest today, Marcos Burrell, in aligning collaborative teams so they can deliver more effectively in their business imperative. My name is Craig Ross. I mentioned that already. I want to introduce our co-host, our producer, the inspired, the illustrious Sherilyn Jane. Sherilyn, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Yes, hi everyone, and welcome to the activation session. As you heard upon entry today, we are recording. Please join us in the conversation in the chat and feel free to ask questions. We may be calling on a few people to share their thoughts or ask a question. And you can use the raise hand feature and we'll call on you. Perfect.
Thank you, Sherilyn.
Yeah.
And now our guest. I've got, is it okay to say butterflies? I'm super excited about our time together. You're about ready to meet and listen to and learn from one remarkable collaborative leader, Marcos Burrell. Marcos and I have been friends for several years, have had the pleasure of serving and supporting Marcos and his remarkable organization, Hologic. We're going to learn a little bit more about that company here in just a moment. Marcos, as you can see by the longest title in the history of humankind there on the slide, does a lot of important things centered around innovation. Hologic, doing things for women's health that are industry setting, standard setting within the industry. And so the opportunity to contribute to their success is meaningful for us at Verus Global. And recently, of course, 2020, with the onset of COVID, Hologic contributed in other meaningful ways, which we're about ready to learn about here in just a moment. But first, Marcos, look at me, I'm going on and on. I'm so excited. Would you please say hello to the collaborative?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Greg, and thank you to the Verus Global for the invitation for today. So yes, I'm Marcos Burrell. I'm the VP for R&D for Hologic for the diagnostics division. As you can see my title, I do manage, responsible for 5 very distinct groups: asset development, the clinical affairs, and the portfolio management. And also now through a new acquisitions of Biotheranostics, I'm responsible for the management of the CLIA lab and the R&D for that group as well. We've been with Hologic for 7 years now, and I know Craig for a lot more. And it's always a pleasure to be talking to him, and hopefully very educational and energizing discussion today.
Marcos, thank you. In a recent conversation with some of your team members, met some folks that are wickedly smart. And when COVID came on, of course, the world was disrupted. And a few organizations were able to find their way and support humanity with COVID tests. Can you tell us a little bit about that story? I think it's important because of this need to be agile in our innovation. Would you please share that story?
Absolutely. And it's been quite an exciting 2 years, I think, for everybody, but definitely for us here at Hologic. So we do diagnostics. You know, that's the core of our division. We do have a big business in molecular diagnostics. So basically, when you go do a test for flu, for HIV, for whatever that is, the instruments, the reagents, everything is, you know, we develop those tests here and sell it to the labs. So when the pandemic came in and show up in COVID in, you know, basically December, January 2020, we definitely need to reorganize our attention, be very, like you say, agile in the resource and the focus of our efforts to truly address this world pandemic in developing a test and then scaling up that test. So to me, when I reflect and I look back in that time, that's the perfect example of collaboration. Initially, we did not know what that was going to amount to be. right? We just heard about this thing coming out of China. It was starting to spread. How much would it be a need to develop a high volume test? We did not know. And we had to continue to change our plans to address the needs. We started to implement again, resources, all the projects, every people around R&D, operations, commercial, to truly address the need, right? So we had to drop most of our portfolio to truly put all the efforts to execute in this important objective. And we scheduled daily huddles. We call it the COVID daily huddle. So we started every day with calls, and it started from a division president, Kevin Thornell, to 100 people across a very matrix organization, as you can imagine. So all within operations, commercial, R&D, at every single level. So we were able to truly discuss the needs, the challenges that we had ahead of us, come up with the creative solutions, and come up, what's most importantly, with a plan to execute on it. And the day after, we will follow up on those. How are those moving? What have we learned? And how can we adjust our plans to address the new needs and new challenges that we found? So it's been very exciting. It hasn't stopped yet. Sometimes we feel that the pandemic is behind us, but for us here at Hologic, we continue to evolve the technology. We continue to evolve the needs from globally. It's not just from the U.S., as well as the regulatory requirements that we need to comply with.
Marcos, thank you for sharing that story. It demonstrates many, many things that are worth reinforcing, particularly leadership, collaborative leadership, and the ability to adapt, respond to a need within the market and do so quickly. It also underscores the fact that human beings, when under crisis, of course, proves time and time again we can come together. The question, and where we're going to go in our short time together, is, wow, disruption after disruption after disruption, is there collaboration fatigue? Hence the title, right? Innovating more effectively by collaborating less. I thought we were supposed to collaborate more. Looking forward to exploring this topic with you. And in so doing, we've got special guests from past sessions coming up as well. They're going to pepper you with some big time questions, I'm sure, Marcos. But first, a little poll for our participants. I'd like to get a sense from our Collaborative Leaders Network, when the words come up, hey, let's collaborate, how do we generally respond? How do you generally respond when a colleague in your area says, hey, let's collaborate? How do you feel? What do you think and feel in moments like that? Love to have folks respond to that. As we wait for the responses, one of the things that we're finding in organizations that don't effectively collaborate, that collaboration can actually cause some resistance, undue resistance. And so I'm curious to know where our team is at here today. We're ready for those responses when you're ready, Sherilyn. There it is. Marcos, you see the data in front of us. Your thoughts and perhaps even your perspective within Hologic when people say, let's collaborate. What do people think and feel?
It's great to see that. Personally, I put in excellent because you can imagine, prioritize collaboration. And it's great to see that everybody thinks it's a good, many times we go with the great intentions to collaborate. But I think what's most important is to define what collaboration is, because many times there is that blur line between collaboration and cooperation. And that's, sometimes we go to these meetings and say, we're gonna collaborate, we are collaborating, but in true sense, we're not. But again, I think it's great to see that most of the people agree and actually prioritize what the collaboration will be.
Marcos, I got a follow-up to that then. When we look at these scores here, and I'm delighted that we've got quite obviously a trend in terms of healthy collaboration. In looking at organizations and how they go about collaboration, I've come to believe that while good collaboration can absolutely speed alignment and the achievement of business imperatives, bad collaboration is incredibly destructive and perhaps even more destructive than a direct command and control approach. It can actually really slow organizations down. I want to go to what we call the backside energy map for just a moment. What causes bad collaboration? What causes leaders to inadvertently stub their toe from your experience? There are a couple of things that get in the way.
So I think personal agendas, right? And many times, again, in highly matrix organizations, we all have very different responsibilities. You told me the need for a shared reality, right? To really understand what is needed to execute on a project, to execute on an objective. And many times we just don't listen. We just understand what our world is, what the needs that me and my group has, and we don't listen to what others have to, go through, or what the needs are going to be. At the end of the day, we had to put the objective as the top priority. What do we try to accomplish? Let's make sure we all understand and align with that piece. And make sure that we try to empathize and understand what the other functions and the other groups and team members need to execute, and how can they help me do that. I always say it takes a village. In these highly technical companies that we work today, it definitely takes a village. It's not just R&D, it's not just operation, it's not just regulatory. We all need to work together to make sure that we ultimately put a product in the market that truly has the impact that we want it to be.
Got it. So personal agenda is one of the things that gets in the way. This is really important for me then to reflect, wow, am I going in the spirit of collaboration? Am I driving my agenda, or am I driving the business agenda? I've got a follow-up question for you. I often see another thing that gets in the way of effective collaboration is when we know this, right? There's different styles people have, personality styles, leadership styles. And sometimes I see leaders who might be, dare I say, afraid of conflict, who will hide in collaboration, right? If we can just all collaborate and I get everybody talking, then it reduces the likelihood that I'm going to have to, of course, make a decision here, and a decision that might not be popular with the larger group. What's your experience with that? Does that also get in the way from your perspective?
Absolutely. Actually, last session that you held, and with a great leader that I see on the call here, Annette, you talk about candor, right? Is that ability to really provide the feedback, to really say how you feel, to really say what you need. And many times people take it very defensive, right? Be defensive about the positions and what they're trying to accomplish. To me, again, it goes back to assume positive intent, assume everybody wants to contribute, assume everybody wants to be great, right? Going back to the basics of why are we here today? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we discussing? And going back to that piece. And that's what I say is try to understand the other's position about why you coming up to this meeting with these proposals. To me, collaboration is about building up to my own ideas. And this is something I learned actually from somebody in my team as we were talking about collaboration. True collaboration shows as you come out, show an idea, somebody builds on it, right? And the other way around, you try to build on somebody else's idea. That's what true collaboration to me looks like.
Collaboration then, Marcos, this is why I knew we'd enjoy this conversation. It's a blend of what appears to be opposing dynamics. It's being inclusive yet being directive. Collaboration is about being connected but also autonomous. It's a blend, and I'm looking forward to our brief time together today because we're going to walk away with clarity around how we can do even more of what we're talking about together today. And that is, of course, model and include others, support others in using a tool that we call the interaction elevator, a psychological model, if you will, that allows us to accomplish exactly what you're talking about, Marcos. Marcos, one more step before we get there, though. I'd like for you, if you wouldn't mind, provide us an example of let's be even more specific. We're talking about strengthening innovation through the act of collaboration. Innovation, I thought, isn't it about giving me creative space? Isn't it about me coming up with the next iPhone? Isn't it about me being the genius here? Help us understand that specific link between collaboration, the process of collaboration, and innovation.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the example of COVID because, again, to me, that was the prime example of collaboration, at least from a personal point of view that I experienced throughout my career. A way that we at that time, we have a large R&D organization. We develop new tests, we develop new technology, all that work. But ultimately, we needed to scale it up, right? There was a global need that really needed to increase the volume of testing that was needed. At that point, we made the decisions to people from R&D to start working with the operations team, with the supply team. And that was what true collaboration was. We were sitting down to say, what is the roadblock that we had ahead of us, right? To scale up production, that's an example, right? And we will address that need, that challenge. And we will sit down with operations, with R&D, with regulatory, with commercial people to say, how can we overcome that obstacle? What is the best solution? And ultimately, and that's what I think we're trying to address, is start converging to an action plan, right? During the collaboration, I see it more like planning versus execution. On the planning session, when we're truly collaborating, what is the most creative, expedite way to address these challenges, right? And then you start moving to more like, how are we going to do it? And reallocate the resources within R&D that has more of a technical background to truly address the technical challenges, either at the operation, at the manufacturing plant, or even directly with suppliers, something that we have never done before, right? Because we ultimately was very separated by the functions and their knowledge. But to me, that's what true collaboration was. It was really thinking about the creative way to address the challenges ahead of us, and then start converging to like, how are we going to execute on it? And to me, that's probably the part that really creates that confusion of collaborating less. It's not just keep thinking and talking. We've been to many meetings where we talk about great ideas that never amount to anything, because we ultimately don't come out with truly a decision, an accountability, and an action plan.
Some key words there, and it's going to show up in the definition for collaboration that we're going to share in just a moment. I want to underscore your words, Marcos, this divergent thinking and then convergent thinking, which I don't have a slide on this, but it begs the question, why are we collaborating? That might be an opportunity for some of us as leaders, myself included, when we start a meeting, when we start the collaborative process, to be very clear about why are we collaborating. And to your point, Marcos, it's to, I paraphrase what you said, but to make better decisions, to come out on the other side with greater clarity of direction. Got a follow-up question for you on that, but before I do that, Sherilyn, I just want to check in with you. Any questions, feedback in the chat space? I've never been able to navigate both that in our conversations here. Sherilyn, the voice of our network here.
Yeah, we're good to go. If anybody has a question or would like to participate in the conversation, feel free to post that in chat.
Perfect, thank you. Marcos,
and as I said that, Ahmet actually just posted a question.
Perfect, let's ask Ahmet to take himself off mute and ask that question verbally. Let's hear it, Ahmet.
Okay, well, good seeing you, Marcos. Marcos is a good collaborator. He shared his granola bars with me in the North Pole, so I'm always thankful to him. So one question I had for him is, the English is a little off. How do you manage a large group that is advocating to make the decision as a group, when in reality, you know that only a few of the opinions in the room are relevant and credible?
I know you're gonna come up with these hard questions.
Good question.
It is challenging. To me, let me try to break your question into pieces, right? There are people who might have a much better understanding of the challenges and therefore contributing to the solution more. But I think it's important for everybody to be heard, right? Just because they don't have the technical knowledge or the business knowledge doesn't imply that their opinions shouldn't count. I think part of the collaboration, you were asking, Craig, why do we collaborate? Is to find that alignment, right? Ultimately, to create that shared reality, to have everybody buy in. There is a very difference between alignment and consensus. We don't want everybody to be in agreement. I've been to very few meetings where we come out of it all thinking the same way. What is important that we ultimately align. So I do believe it's important to be very open about the data, about what we're trying to accomplish, why is it important, and to be able to hear everybody on their thoughts and opinions. So basically, we hear the ideas, their motivations are part of the process. So at the end of the day, whether they agree on those or not on those, they've been heard and they should be aligned. But ultimately, it comes to accountability. And to me, that's the challenge part of collaboration. We all can express our ideas, right? Build on those, but ultimately it has to come up as an action plan that can be executed. And that's where, we had to have that point person that is actually making a decision out of all those collaboration pieces. And that's the challenging part in many ways.
Yeah, that's the part I'd like to underscore. I think you stated that perfectly, and it's in the spirit of serving the network that's both here with us live and listening later. One of the practices, a discipline that we're encouraging collaborative leaders to demonstrate that's not normal in most organizations is at the beginning of the collaborative process, at the beginning of a meeting, is to declare and ensure that there's understanding around who or how the decision will be made. Who's going to make the decision, or how is the decision going to be made? Love your thoughts around them, creating that inclusive environment, making sure that voices are heard. Yet when in today's complex and indeed disrupted world, and everyone belonging to, let's say, 6, 7, 8 teams, projects and initiatives and so forth, we forget those racy moments. We forget who's got the D as an example and what my role is. And so we're strongly encouraging, because we're seeing a lot of value in answer to Ahmet's question. We're seeing a lot of value in having leaders declare who's going to make this decision and how it's going to be made, even before we start the collaborative process. Marcos, I'm not sure, does that resonate for you? Your thoughts?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. To me, that's the piece. It's important to hear everybody. Ultimately, the outcome is what matters of the collaboration, right? And, you had this catchy collaborating less, and, that was, you cannot imagine how many people came to my office. So you're not going to collaborate anymore. It's not about that. It's truly to come out of the collaboration with an action plan, right? That can be executed on. And many times, because of the lack of consensus, right? You're going to have that single point of accountability to say who's going to ultimately make the decision of what's come out of this discussion.
Yeah, I want to go on the record as reinforcing Marcos's maturity, emotional intelligence, the ability to put his picture next to the title, How to Collaborate Less. We did include that little subtitle or more in some cases, but ultimately this is about collaborating effectively, Marcos. Thank you. Because the truth of the matter is organizations are suffering from the inability to collaborate effectively. WTF, want the facts, of course, is what that acronym stands for. I'd like to bring everyone's attention to the last 2 bullets specifically. This from McKinsey and some combination with Gallup data. It's really apparent that organizations are struggling from ineffective collaboration. And then, of course, the ability to work cross-functionally, the correlation with the effective collaboration and our work cross-functionally. So let's do something about it. Interestingly enough, when you look at definitions of collaboration, and I encourage anyone to do this, we've got some experts here that you'll see quotes. I don't want to throw them under the bus, but these are esteemed institutions of academia that have very broad definitions of collaboration. And to your point, Marcos, without a clear definition of collaboration, how can we even do it effectively? And so the Verisk Global definition of collaboration that's been refined over 20 plus years is in front of us on the screen. There are different components of this definition that become really critical from our perspective. I'd like to underscore a few of those and then turn it over to you, Marcos. We know from the business intelligence gurus that the most effective organizations are doing 3 things in particular. They're driving insights because they're interpreting data together. That's really key. So the insights. Number 2 is they have an effective way of problem solving. And of course, their ability to make decisions, quality decisions. Marcos, you've been pointing at that. When you look at this definition, then building on that, what's important to you, Marcos, in this definition?
The two pieces that really stand out to me is the co-creating new knowledge and the aligning a group, right? So co-creating new knowledge is what I was trying to say, maybe less eloquently, is building up on your ideas, yeah? And the other way around, building on somebody else's idea. Is that co-discovery, right? You state the problem, how do we solve it? And somebody might come up with ideas and we start building on those. To me, that's the co-creating the new knowledge. And ultimately aligning the group, to me, again, creating that shared reality where we all understand what is needed, why is it needed, and how can we contribute to the solution. So to me, those are two pieces that stand out. Like you said, to me, very personally important is the decision maker. You know, at the end of the day, you want to come out with that decision and an action plan. Maybe that's my PMO hat that it speaks to it, but we want a plan. We want to execute on those ideas later on. And that's when you start moving down to the cooperation and the collaboration and the execution.
Marcos, I knew I wanted to have you as a guest in an activation session. We were an offsite in a program, and the group was talking about alignment, and you got really passionate. And you said, I think I'm quoting you here. You said, there's no better way to align a team than through a collaborative effort. You've spoken to it. I'd like for you to go a little bit deeper. Why do you believe that? And do you have any specific examples of what it means to align a team? Not necessarily create agreement, but align a team.
I think you miss a little bit of my hand gestures. You know, I'm Latino. I speak a lot with my hands. So when I get passionate, you can see my hands flying around.
Yes.
No, absolutely. And to me, that's actually it's a great session that we have with you, because as I said at the beginning of the presentation, I manage 5 very distinct groups. Many of them don't really need to interact with each other, right? But at the end of the day, we're on the same business, right? We're on the same organization. So being able to really share, because this is another piece that is important. We talk about collaboration as it's something that you do with your peers, but it's definitely something that you have to do with your team as well, right? We have silos. We do have silos within our own groups as well that you need to break. So to me, being able to really share that reality, to really have understanding of the business and the challenges, right? So like I say, as a leader of 5 distinct groups, I had to make these decisions. I want to make the best decisions. Here, Hologic, we really utilize a lot of the Gallup strength. Most of my strengths are in execution, right? I really try to move forward. I have no problem making decisions. The problem is I make a lot of wrong decisions, right? So to me, I'm self-aware. So I want to make sure that I involve everybody into the decision-making process, right? So I'm better informed and trying to make those decisions. And by doing so, I make sure that I have the buy-in of the team to execute on those decisions.
Love that. And I'm going to be intentionally repetitive as a recommendation to the Collaborative Leaders Network that's participating and listening later. This newer practice of declaring upfront in meetings, what is the decision-making process? Who has that idea? How are we going to make the decision? So everybody has that awareness so that we can move forward in the collaborative effort much more effectively. All right, building on this definition, then, of course, the challenge for us always is how do we get just 10% more effective at doing this? Indeed, how do we do it? I'm excited to share with everyone a tool that we call the Interaction Elevator. This is a tool that Marcos and his team organization are using effectively. Other leaders like Ahmet Tezel and others who are responsible for strengthening innovation are using the Interaction Elevator to collaborate less in some cases, and in other cases to collaborate more. Bottom line is to collaborate more effectively. The beauty of this tool, there's many aspects, but one of the essence of it is its simplicity. When you think about basic human interactions, you can see 5 of them highlighted on the screen in front of you. No coincidence that they begin with C's. And so there's different types of interactions. The bottom 2, smaller, lighter font, they can also be valuable. For example, in large global organizations, you might be in, let's say, a regional sales role, and there might be someone in purchasing in the same organization in another continent of the world. But you're in the same company, you are basically coexisting though. There's no interaction. In some commercial organizations, they effectively use competing as a method for bringing out the best in individuals and in teams. It's an effective method. We know this from research. In the innovation space, R&D, sciences, engineers, and so forth, that method not as typical or not as commonly used, if you will. And so we're going to spend our time with Interaction Elevator focusing on those three that you see emphasized: cooperating, coordinating, cooperating, and ultimately collaborating. So how do we decide which, let's use the word floor, we should operate on with a team? Well, there are two primary levers to consider. One is how power is utilized. The further we go up on the interaction elevator, when we're at the higher levels of collaboration, we know that power, we see effective leaders like Marcos disperse power actually to people in the collaborative process, and most specifically to the ideas. And so power is actually following ideas. I think, Marcos, you said it, this is where we're actually building on each other's idea. Conversely, when we're at the, of course, coordinate floor, power then becomes more centric to the person with authority. That's typically positional authority. There's other types of authorities too that can also play a role. Ultimately, who makes the decision? Marcos, before I get your thoughts on this, I'd like to share the other level, and that's of course how thinking occurs. I've alluded to this, that of course in the collaborative levels, thinking occurs with, of course, dispersion to ideas, whereas in the coordinate and of course cooperate, it's more centric to individuals. I put up some of the elements of collaborate, but I want to stop here. Given your experience, Marcos, with the interaction elevator, what's important to reinforce for our participants today?
First, I want to thank you because you just, again, taught me something. To me, the compete and coexist, to me, have a challenge acknowledging that there's value to it. So I appreciate your thoughts about how this could be used to really move some organizations forward. Again, as an R&D, I do see the coexist. I have seen it where we just had to tolerate and coexist in the same environment, but never saw it as a positive. So great to see how these could be used for organizations. So it's great, and I think this graph really explains very well with collaborate, disperse, the power to get dispersed about colleagues. And again, I want to go back to the example of these daily huddles for COVID. We have, like I said, from the division presidents, all the leadership team, functional VPs and engineers and people on the manufacturing floor and on the field, all in one call. And all those boundaries and all those titles and all those, they disappear, right? We were all equal. We were just having a conversation about what needed to be executed. And that openness, I think, is the strength of the culture of Hologic, that we were able to create that. I've seen other organizations were very hierarchical, right? And people look up to say, what do you want me to say? What decisions you need to make? To me, that's what's hindering that collaboration, when people don't feel open to really express themselves. And on the right, the thinking, let's think together. Like I always say to everybody, I consider myself a smart person, but the subject matter experts are in my team. It's definitely not me. I like to be in a room where I'm the least qualified person, right? Ultimately, I want to hear from everybody else, and everybody needs to feel that their opinion is being heard, their opinion matter, and their motivations are taken into account. So that's important on the top level of the collaboration. But ultimately, this is an elevator, right? You want to move up and down. And that to me is what makes effective collaboration, is being able to move on to the next level, right? The cooperate and the coordinate, because that to me is the action plan. That's where the decisions have been made and start being executed at the lower levels.
Appreciate that. And we're going to get into specifics of that And what that looks like, we can see on the right-hand side of the screen. I'm looking at the same graphic that you are, that power flows to ideas, not people. New knowledge is created through critical thinking. I want to emphasize that it's in this phase that there's an increase in variability. In fact, in effective collaboration, when there's vigorous debate and we're challenging one another's ideas, it can feel like things are beginning to be even more ambiguous. And I see some leaders struggle with that, Marcos, because there's this desire to reduce variability, right? There's a desire to eliminate the ambiguity of the path forward. Yet this is the act of creating new knowledge. How would you coach me? If, let's say I've got a 1-hour meeting with my team, I want to collaborate effectively. And then the second half of the meeting, I want to coordinate. I want to get into role clarity and so forth. You can see that at the bottom of the screen. And that's where we're going to make those decisions that you were talking about early. Coach me on not getting too anxious to reduce variability.
Yeah, and to me, that's a good point, because how ineffective collaboration looks like to me is ambiguity, right? I've been, and I'm sure many of us have been to meetings where we start talking about these crazy, great ideas, and we all nod our heads, right? And we should do that, and we should do this, and we should do the other. And at the end of the meeting, all these great ideas stay out there, but without narrowing down. Right? So to me, ineffective collaboration looks as ambiguity. We don't know what we decided. We talk about these great ideas, but we don't know what we need to do. To me, that goes back to that power, right? You need to start narrowing down the accountability, the single source, single point of accountability. It has to start making decisions. Ultimately, you might start talking to people to see if you find the consensus, but I guarantee you more than, often, you will not find a consensus. You just need to make sure you find that alignment, and you personally have to start narrowing down to the decision-making process.
Got it. Marcos, I'd like to give our network here some examples of what this looks like, more examples. I'm going to provide one. I'm creating some space for you to be thinking about it as an example of how we move up and down this elevator. I'd like to reinforce something you just said first, and that is all levels of the interaction elevator are important. We work with plenty of leadership teams that are responsible for global operations, if you will, setting and executing strategy. And there are plenty of times in meetings that haven't been productive where they realize, we just need to coexist on this. There's no need for us to even be having this conversation, because this is a topic where we simply need to coexist. Other topics, and here's my example, is of course talent, developing talent. And when we talk about talent reviews and so forth, we might find ourselves where we have to coordinate, make decisions on which talent needs to be invested in, which talent, of course, is promotable soon, promotable later, and so forth. If I'm at the, of course, cooperate stage, we might find an opportunity where within one function, there's a need for particular talent, and this particular function has those capabilities, and they can either short-term or long-term support one another. And so they're going to cooperate in exchanging talent, if you will. We've seen that happen. And the collaborate phase is a particular meeting where they're identifying that they've got a shortage of a specific capability in the organization, and they have to come together and have vigorous debate around what it looks like to invest resources to either acquire or develop those capabilities. And then, of course, they move down, make the decisions, and the coordinate floor, and of course, execute. So some examples on the topic of talent as it relates to applying the interaction elevator. Marcos, do you have an example for the network?
And you just made me think about it. I see this through acquisitions. So we have very recently have made 3 acquisitions globally. And initially you have a lot of groups that are similar, right, across the globe. And you many times go as 6. But you want to start growing, into more of a coordination and cooperation. And you start seeing that when we have a group in Europe that can do the work that can be done here in the United States, but we don't have the resources here to do it. And we move that work outside for them to do. But ultimately, you want to move to the collaboration. when you say, is it the most effective use of the resources that we have? Apologies, I don't know if you hear it, but I live in San Diego and we have the Air Force going around. So every now and then I have these airplanes that fly.
No problem. No problem. I feel safer already.
Yeah. The sound of freedom. That's what we call it here. So it is, you want to start moving to that collaboration phase when you truly start thinking like long-term, what is the best structure that we can support each other, right, as an organization. So I seen this firsthand through the acquisitions as we grow as a business, right? You start seeing functions that are replicated in other divisions, in other functions, and you start trying to say, how can we truly collaborate? How can we truly deliver on the business imperative more effectively?
I love that. And some specific examples as it relates to acquiring new companies. If I'm a business leader listening right now, I might not be responsible for acquiring new companies. However, talking about onboarding talent or taking on additional initiatives or projects, I think the same applies in terms of your application of the interaction elevator.
And it has to be, you have to be very sensitive about it, right? You know, unfortunately, a buzzword that is used through new acquisitions is synergies, right? And synergies people equate to like, oh my God, people are getting laid off. I'm talking about very different things that is about collaboration, like truly based on the size of the business, the geographical locations, how can we be more effective with the resources that we have?
Yeah, got it. You know, one of the things you're triggering for me as we transition here, and Cheryl-Lyn, I want to come to you in just a moment as it relates to pulling in the voice of the network. Should we have some comments? First, I'd like to offer another practice in applying the interaction elevator based upon our experience. You now are equipped with the method. You have this tool, as we like to call it at Verus Global. Others you're interacting with might not have the tool. They might not have, let's say, the language of the interaction elevator. Yet, human beings understand, most of us, the idea of divergent thinking and convergent thinking. And so I want to reinforce that we can apply the interaction elevator with others who don't know the tool by simply using that language. Marcos gave us the example earlier in our time together. We can begin a meeting declaring who and how is we're going to make the decision. And then Marcos can say, I want to create some divergent thinking here. All ideas count. Let's debate the ideas. And then maybe 20 minutes left of the meeting, we can say, hey, let's bring in some convergent thinking here. Let's start to round this out and land on the decision that needs to be made and our action steps forward. Oftentimes, Marcos, I don't know about you, but we see leaders who do the divergent thinking for maybe the first 58 minutes of a meeting and then leave the final 2 minutes for the convergent. And then they, of course, have to call another meeting. I don't know if you've had similar experiences.
No, absolutely. And at the end of the day, like I said, we want to get out of that room that are fully aligned and everybody feels that it's being heard. What you don't want to start rush at the end of the day to say, great, I heard you all, but this is what we're doing. It comes across very one directional. I can see that flying by me.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Cheryl-Lyn.
Yeah, that was actually, Craig, you kind of alluded to a question that I had is there an ideal percentage of time that you should be spending on any of the floors? So say, you just gave an example of, collaborating for 57 minutes and leaving the last 3. What is the ideal kind of percentage, say, if you have an hour meeting?
I appreciate that. Marcos, your thoughts on that? I've got some ideas, but I'd like to hear from an expert.
I'm trying to think about, again, I never time it. I really don't think there is a one size fits all. I really don't believe that there is one formula that can be applied. I think you have to read the room. I think it's important to understand the different levels of understanding that the members of that meeting may have or may not have. So you might have to spend more time truly explaining the issue. So I don't believe, I never see myself trying to think about, I want to spend half an hour. I do believe it's important to spend enough time for the collaboration, for the divergence discussion to take place, and take enough to really make sure that we actually hunt it down to a plan and a decision.
Cheryl-Lyn, I'm glad you asked. And Marcos, your response, I'm getting something even clearer. And I think we can tie it to, what experts call, bounded rationality. a term psychologists use in terms of how we make decisions. And they really say there's 3 variables, and Sherilyn, and I hadn't thought about this, those 3 variables determine, for me anyway, when and where I go to the floor of coordinate. Those variables are how much data do we have? How much information do we have? The second one is how much time do we have to make the decision? Do we have just this 1 hour together, or do we have 2 weeks before we need to make the decision? And then the third one is the emotional state of the people making the decision. And so if we're particularly pressured and there's a lot of crazy things going on, the team's overwhelmed and stressed, it might serve us to either delay the decision or make the decision even sooner, based upon the judgment call of that particular leader. 3 variables: the amount of data we have, time we have to make the decision, and the emotional state of the team. Marcos, your thoughts on that?
I love it. I mean, you just explained much better what I was trying to say, but you make me think, because one thing that I always mention is we hide behind a curtain of knowledge to make a decision, right? We always try to find what is the data that we don't have, right? So we're going to try to pursue it before we make a decision. And I think it's important to state that time bound, right? By when we want to make that decision, and we're going to make the decision with the data that we have, right? And to me, that's one of those dangerous loopholes that we can find through collaboration, to say, well, what about this? And we always start asking questions until somebody say, well, I don't know. Well, we need to find that. We need to find that data before we make a decision. And to me, that's a escape route. And I think that's important to say, we're going to have to make the decision, and we're going to make the decision by this time constraint. That's great.
Because we're going to wrap up our time together in just a little bit by asking everyone to share their insight in an instant. What was the number 1 or top insight that they received? I think we're hitting on one that resonates for me anyway, that I'm going to hold on to here as we wrap our time up together. Sherilyn, thanks for asking the question. Take next week off. Nicely done. Appreciate that.
Hey, you get a raise.
You said, yeah.
I want to offer something to both, again, the participants we have live and those that are listening later. We're under extraordinary times. I was working with another leader similar to Marcos, passionate about delivering the business imperative by achieving the human imperative. We were talking about this idea of meeting the moment that we're in. We're in such a volatile moment, as we well know, with the rapid increase in inflation, supply chain issues and so forth, and a workforce that has never been so stressed. And so I'm looking forward to building on this idea that this particular leader had, and that's getting together in a roundtable discussion, much like Marcos, Sherilyn, and I are having now. If you're interested in participating in that, please reach out to the one and only Jamie Conklin, who's our Director of Client Partnerships and Relationships. Sherilyn is posting in the chat space an opportunity for you to share your interest in that and be considered for a roundtable discussion, or inviting other leaders in your organization who you feel might benefit from the same. It is imperative that we as collaborative leaders meet this moment, not just for our corporations, but for the employees for whom we're responsible for leading. Questions, answers, Sherilyn, before I wrap things up here, any final questions or thoughts from the network that's participating today?
Yeah, I think that this has been a great discussion. I'm excited to hear everybody's insights in an instant, or read them.
All right, great. Well, as we round out to that, I'm gonna challenge everyone to an exercise that in the next 7 business days, including you and I, Marcos, and you, Sherilyn, that have earned that week off, that we step forward and apply the interaction elevator, whether we use the language or not, but we find a place in the next 7 business days to apply this so we can drive that human imperative and deliver on our business imperative. Marcos, you up for that?
Absolutely.
All right. On behalf of everyone at Verus Global, as we move to our insights in an instant, I want to thank everyone for the important collaborative leadership you're demonstrating on a daily basis. Collaborating less, collaborating more. Ultimately, this has been about collaborating more effectively. Sherilyn, your insight in an instant as we wrap things up.
Yeah, so mine came from a little bit earlier. Marcos was just talking about the collaboration is really to spark ideas and to build on others. And then we saw the collaboration, the definition of, kind of co-creating new ideas. And then I think also that not everyone has to be in agreement. You just have to be in alignment. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really important. Yeah.
Really appreciate you underscoring that. And it was actually something that that Marcos said at the very beginning as I was sharing that coexist and then the compete, Marcos. There's some teams that we're supporting right now that I'm actually realizing we need to underscore that even more so that we can utilize our time even more effectively at those other levels of the interaction elevator. I appreciate
First, I want to thank you again, the Verus Global team, for the invitation. It's always insightful for me. I'm learning. I learn every day, and every time I interact with you, you make me a better leader. But to me, that's the piece: is the coexist, the compete, even how those are effective way to interact. From an R&D perspective, from my perspective, again, this is one of those bias that I have. It's like we cannot compete, we cannot coexist. We need to collaborate. But there is always valuable interactions for different organizations for different needs. So to me, that's an insight that I really take with me.
Thank you for being humble, being hungry, for contributing to humanity, Marcos. Really appreciate what you and Hologic do in our world. Thank you to all the collaborative leaders who joined us here today. Remember, leadership matters, but only teams deliver. Thank you, everybody. Absolutely. We'll see you in our next activation session. Thanks, Marcos.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Take good care. Thank you so much.